Now, the artist I'm going to talk about in this episode, he's been in the business for about 7 decades, so no, I can't give you an overview of his entire career. That would take multiple episodes. He's also recorded 47 studio albums and 7 live albums, so no, I can't review all of those either. But what I am going to do is just go back through his catalog and pull out some albums from the library of his that I really enjoy, and I'll tell you why. I'm talking about Van Morrison, so let's go ahead and drop the needle. In previous episodes, I've told you about how I grew up in a small town just outside of Chicago and how radio played such an important part of how I heard music in those days. And the big radio stations from Chicago were WLS and WCFL. And in high school, I had a band, which I've talked about, which is called The Darkness. Yeah, we had the name first. And we would very often listen to the radio to find out songs that were hot so that we could learn them, so we could play them at the sock hops. And one of those songs came soaring out of the radio one day and just grabbed us. And it only had 3 chords. So, of course, it would be easy to play. So we learned it, and it became part of our repertoire. And it was always a great hit with the kids when we played this song, which was recorded by the Shadows of Night. And the song was called Gloria. And we and the audiences loved it. Gloria by the Shadows of Night took off and went to number 10 on the national charts. But as you can see from this WLS Silver Dollar survey of hits in the Chicago area that was printed on February 25th, 1966, Gloria by Shadows of Night did much better in the Chicago area than it did nationally. And a year later, the band that actually had originally recorded the song released it in the U.S. And I finally found out that the Shadows of Night did not create Gloria. In fact, it was done by a guy named Van Morrison with a group called Them. Now, when Them actually released their version of Gloria, it only hit number 75 in the charts, where, as I said, Shadows of Night went to number 10. Now, part of the reason that the Shadows of Night song was so successful was that radio stations were a little bit apprehensive about playing Van Morrison and Them's version, which includes the lines, "She comes up to my room," which the Shadows of Night changed to, "She calls out my name." And it became a big hit for them. So although I know that actually Van Morrison and Them created Gloria, in my heart of hearts, Gloria will always belong to that great Chicago band, the Shadows of Night. Van Morrison and Them were from Northern Ireland, and they put out a couple of albums, but then Van Morrison decided to go solo with his first solo album, which is called Blowin' Your Mind. Now, he actually does not consider this a true album. He stated that basically his producer took a bunch of tracks that were laying around and cobbled them all together to make this album. Nonetheless, the album starts off with a terrific song, Brown-Eyed Girl. And anybody who's ever heard those lyrics, making love in the green grass behind the stadium with you, my brown-eyed girl, you're hooked right there. There are other good songs on the album, like He Ain't Give You None, Spanish Rose, and then there's that weird, scary, and dark, almost 10-minute long, TB Sheets. After the album was released, Van decides to split with his manager and signs a new contract with Warner Brothers. In 1968, he releases his first album for Warner Brothers, which is called Astral Weeks. Now, this is a very weird kind of album in that he refers to it as a song cycle or a concept album. And I played the heck out of this record, and there are a lot of great songs on it. But the record company never promoted it, and it really wasn't a hit for Van. The title song, Astral Weeks, is great, and who can forget the opening line, "If I ventured in the slipstream between the viaducts of your dream." With that one opening line, you know you're in the presence of a poet. I like Sweet Thing, Cypress Avenue. Now, Van has said that Cypress Avenue is a real street in Belfast, not far from the street that he grew up on. But the big difference is he grew up kind of in a working class area, and Cypress Avenue was a very wealthy, posh section of Belfast. Then there's the great Madame George at almost 10 minutes in length. Now, there's been some controversy about this song as to whether it's really about a drag queen or not. Now, Van Morrison says that it's not. And even though the title is Madame George, when he sings the song, he sings the lyrics Madame Joy. The album closes with Slim Slow Slider, which is another dark tale of watching someone die, like the earlier TV Sheets. Now, like I said, the record company didn't really promote it, and in the UK it was pretty much ignored. But in the US, college and underground radio stations picked it up and played it, and I know on my radio show I played this album a lot. After the commercial failure of Astral Weeks, Van Morrison takes 2 years to record his next album, and he purposely decides that he wants to make this a record that people can relate to, that could sell some records. So all the songs are really inviting, and the album is called Moondance. I like the lead-off, and it stoned me, and then of course then there's Moondance, Crazy Love, The Great Into the Mystic, Caravan, and Glad Tidings. The album was an immediate hit, both in the UK and the US, and Van Morrison was established as a star. Later that same year, he releases his fourth album, which is called His Band and Street Choir. Now, that's not the title he wanted it to be. He wanted the album to be titled Virgo's Fool, but the record company decided to change it. And Van has been stated as saying he doesn't really like this record, but I do. Songs include the hit Domino, I've Been Working, I'll Be Your Lover Too, The Great Blue Money, and Street Choir. And the album sold very well. In 1971, he releases his fifth album, which is called Tupelo Honey. And this, I think, is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Van Morrison album. And it starts with that terrific song, Wild Night. Now, I have to tell you a story about the lead-off song, Wild Night. It starts with the lyric, "A wild night is coming." Now, when I was a disc jockey at an underground radio station in LA, I had the late night shift. And I would always start my shift by playing two songs. The first was a Walt Disney song, which is called Fun with Music. Let's have some fun with music, because music's fun. And then I would seamlessly segue. You remember I told you about that in a previous episode. Segue into Van's Wild Night, with A Wild Night is Coming. My radio show was off and running, and the audience knew they were in for a wild night of music. I also like Straight to Your Heart Like a Cannonball. That's a great song. You're My Woman, the terrific Tupelo Honey, and of course, I Want to Rue You, and then the closer, Moonshine Whiskey. This album got played a lot on my radio shows in 1971. I really like this record. And then in 1972, he releases his next album, St. Dominic's Preview, which becomes, to that point, his best-selling record. Great songs on this record. The lead-off, Jackie Wilson Said, I'm in Heaven When You Smile, Gypsy, Listen to the Lion, St. Dominic's Preview, and the closer, another long song from Van, Almost Independence Day, which is almost 10 minutes long. And then in 1974, he decides to release a live album. But it's a double live album called It's Too Late to Stop Now, and it's considered one of the best live albums of all time. And I really like it because parts of it were recorded at the Troubadour in Los Angeles when I was in the audience. And critics have claimed that his live renditions of these songs are even better than the original recordings on earlier albums. It contains a lot of the hits like Domino and Here Comes the Night and Gloria, but also glorious versions of Cypress Avenue, St. Dominic's Preview, Listen to the Lions, and the great Caravan. And then in 1976, Van Morrison makes a guest appearance at the last concert that the group The Band did, which was called The Last Waltz, and was filmed and made a movie by Martin Scorsese, and then they released a soundtrack album from it as well. Van is great on this performance, and he does a terrific version of Caravan. And if you haven't seen the movie The Last Waltz, or if you haven't seen it for a few years, you should check it out. It's really fun. Now for a full disclosure. After 1976, I stopped listening to Van Morrison. I don't know why, and I know I can hear you howling because he's done 37 albums since then. That'd be an awful lot for me to catch up on. So please leave me comments and tell me, of those 37 albums that I haven't yet listened to, which ones are your favorites and why. I'd be very curious to learn more about Van's expanding catalog. In the year 2009, I found out that Van Morrison was going to play at the Hollywood Bowl in LA. And not only was he going to play live there, but he was going to play Astral Weeks in its entirety, which he had never performed live. Now, I really wanted to go, but for a variety of reasons, I didn't make it. But fortunately, an album has come out which captures that evening. And it's a very good album. And interestingly enough, Van plays around a little bit with the sequencing of the songs of Astral Weeks, so they're not exactly in the same order that they were on the original record. Nonetheless, it's a great live recording. Van Morrison made some great music in the 60s and 70s. There's always going to be a place in my heart for that brown-eyed girl. And yeah, I Want to Rue You, and I certainly love that Tupelo Honey. Now, as usual, I've created a playlist on Spotify that will contain some, if not all, of the songs that I've talked about in this episode. So you can go back and re-listen to some of those great songs from Van Morrison. As Van sings, it's a wild night coming. So have a good one. Thanks for watching, and keep it rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.